It's never going to be perfect, but I think as a parent, even the refs, like you got a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old referee on the ice and you're screaming over the boards at them. And it's like, and we've seen it at soccer a number of times where like these kids are out here on a Saturday morning, they're refereeing the game and the parents are just ruthless. I think we're losing the joy in the process and we're losing the joy in the athlete or in the child. And I think if you can sort of just take some steps back and go, okay, the climate here is so intense. You know, there's 6-year-olds like being rated as the top, one of the top teams. Like it's so crazy how the climate has gone, right? The climate there's just so many opinions. I think it's just, you have to remember what you're doing it for, and it's for the child's benefit. It's not for the parents' benefit. I do wish that we were more accepting of multi-sport athletes because really it does help the athlete in a lot of ways, and even burnout, like just doing something different. So I think that's a bit broken at this point. I mean, I remember just the first time Riley played hockey, I was coaching on the ice and one of the parents right away, first day, was like, why is there a woman coaching my son? Like right away. Like, and so you had to earn their trust.
Trust is something that many wise people have placed in Cammi Granato in the hockey world over the past number of decades, and there are many teams and organizations that have benefited many times over by placing that trust in her. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, the host of Better Sports Parents, and welcome to the latest episode to help you, me, and anyone else out there watching and listening become exactly that, a better sports parent, one day, 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year at a time. The term trailblazer seems somewhat inadequate for the guest of this particular episode. Cammi Granato captained the United States to the first ever gold medal ever awarded in the Olympics in women's hockey. She was also one of 2 women who formed the inaugural class of women being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2010. Since that time, she's impacted hockey in a number of different ways, including authoring a children's book on the sport, coaching. She is the first female pro scout ever hired in the National Hockey League, and she is currently the assistant general manager with the Vancouver Canucks. Very importantly for this podcast, Cammi, like many of you, is a parent. She has 2 sons that she shares with Ray Ferraro, Riley and Reese, and she also has 2 stepsons in Matt and Landon Ferraro. This is part of a sub-series of Better Sports Parents, a 3-week run where we're going to hear from 3 people within the same family. Many of you will have heard Ray Ferraro on last week's episode. This week it's Cammi Granato, and next week it will be Landon Ferraro. I considered having Ray and Cammi on in the same episode when I first dreamed this up, but I wanted to explore the unique pathways and influences that have helped mold them into the people and parents that you find today. Cammi, as you will find out very shortly, has a wealth of knowledge not only in the sport, but in community and in team. And you will hear her very unique path to where she is today. She has plenty of great insight and advice for parents, and she's here to share it with you now. So please enjoy this conversation with Cammi Granato. Thank you very much for doing this, Cammi. How are you?
No problem, Scotty. I'm good. Getting ready for a good season here.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. And let's go all the way back in time to figure out where this all began for you, because most people will know how accomplished you are in the sport. But when did the hockey bug first bite you?
Very early, very early. I had 5 siblings, 3 brothers that had been already into hockey. My dad, who had brought my mom to a Blackhawks game for his first date. So ingrained in hockey already when I just was born into like being a Blackhawk fan. And then brothers that were like, anytime there was anything remotely of a ball or a puck, we were playing hockey. And so I just followed along. And being a younger sibling, when you're following around, my oldest brother was 6.5 years older than me, and then it was 4 and then 2. And so I had to keep up. And I'm so thankful that they were open to, like, just letting me tag around and play, but I got pounced on a lot. I learned resilience pretty early, and I just learned to love the game like they did.
Well, it's interesting because you grew up in Greater Chicago, and you mentioned that your dad and your mom went on their first date at a Blackhawks game, but there's a lot of different sports certainly in that area, but hockey was the one that your family gravitated to. Was that a passion of your father's growing up? Why do you think that was the sport that became the main one in the Granato household?
So my grandpa had season tickets. My dad and my grandpa, my uncle would worked the business together in Chicago, and it was a family business. And then they got tickets to the Blackhawks, and so we got to go to the games. And I guess when my oldest brother Tony was like 5, he was just enamored, like would sit at the games and not say a word and just watch. And so my dad decided, okay, well let's try him in hockey, and so he started to coach, and he coached all my brothers early on, and the bug just started from there. It was really like we saw the team that we loved, and we all wanted to play it. It's kind of how it happened, and I think that's generally what a lot of people get inspired from. If you can see it, you want to be it. So that's kind of where it started. And I think my parents just they did it for the love of, just enjoying the sport, and my dad loved coaching, and so, yeah, I just that's all I remember. It was there when I started. I had my very first jersey was, like, 3 years old. I liked Keith Magnuson. He had red hair, I think that's why I liked him, but I have pictures of me in that jersey from I think I was 3 years old, so definitely, had the bug early.
Well, I'm a proponent of anybody cheering for someone with red hair, so that certainly fits on this
Perfect.
podcast. You mentioned if you can see it, you can be it. It's easy to forget now that we're here in 2025, but if we go back in time, what you would end up becoming, you couldn't see at that time, which
No.
was a professional women's hockey player or a woman playing for a
Yeah.
national team and being a prominent hockey player. So, how did you enter into sports? Because it was a much different environment in youth sports at the time you were growing up.
I think it definitely helped to have 3 older brothers in an organization. When I told my parents I wanted to skate, they just assumed that like, I kept telling them that I wanted to play, and they just assumed that I meant figure skating because that's what my sister did. And when they put me in the figure skates, I'd go to the class, but then when they weren't looking, I would walk out the back. I don't remember this, my mom tells me this. I would walk out the back of the studio rink and go stand by the glass. And my mom would be like, "Where'd she go?" And she said, "Hey, you gotta stay in these lessons." And I'm like, "I wanna play hockey. I wanna play this, not that." And so, disappointing my sister because she really was excited to have someone, with her. Yeah, they told me that if I just finished those lessons that in the spring, they let me play spring hockey, and it started from there. And I was really, really lucky, to be honest, because there were so many stories of women that I've heard from that had talked about in that era wanted to play and they just couldn't. So that was my journey. It started pretty young. I was in like a mini mite, I guess maybe spring session, and then once they saw the like joy and the love that I had for it and my passion, I mean, they they just said, "Let's sign her up." So I signed up with played my first year with my brother and my cousin on a team.
And there were barriers in the way. And as you've mentioned, certainly in your Hockey Hall of Fame speech when you were inducted in 2010, that when you were playing hockey as a young girl, you didn't see yourself as any different than any of the other players, but you would hear parents from other teams talk about you being the only girl. So there's that pressure. Now that you're a parent yourself, Cammy, why do you think that mattered to other parents?
I guess because it was different, and it was the unknown, and they didn't know what they were up against. They thought, "Well, the girl's on our team, she's gonna make us worse," or I don't know if that's the case, but I just know the noise around it was really loud, and it wasn't so much when I was younger. It got to be, like, once you got to a little bit more competitive hockey, like 10, 11, 12. I played till I was 17 with boys. There were a lot of parents that, like, just made a fuss about it, or, like, I'd walk into the rink, and this is, again, when I'm a little bit older with my bag, and parents would just stop their conversations and just look, and it was just like, "Okay, but what is the big deal?" And I always had I think the hardest thing for me was I always had to turn left in that lobby and not go through the glass doors to the locker rooms. I had to go left to the bathroom and get changed in the bathroom and then go into the rink, into the locker room when I was fully dressed. So that I hated because the figure skaters would come in and turn the lights off, tell me I'm weird. And but I think what I had was I had a buffer around me. My family was so supportive and I knew I wanted to do this and they were supportive of it. And my sister was like, hey, she's going to do what she wants. And she would tell me, don't worry about these people. You're good. Do what you're doing. And I think that's what helped. And then the parent stuff, like I remember one father who like just said, my kid's not coming to play for this team if she's on it. And my coaches were all also like big advocates. So when say I had a buffer on me, the coaches were a big part of that. And, my coach said, "Well, then don't come to the team. She's on our team and she's a big part of it." And so he would just make so much noise. My parents again protected me from that, but like he would talk to other parents and try to get them to say that I shouldn't be on the team. And within a month of that team's starting, he was my biggest advocate. He became my most fierce protector. He told his son, like anyone touches her, you make sure that they don't. And so it kind of flipped. It was more like the unknown, but then he realized, hey, she's just a hockey player that can actually play with this team. And I was playing up a year. So, and I was keeping up with the team. So I think he understood that I was a hockey player and he just didn't, once he got, you know, through the whole education of like, oh, a woman can actually play hockey or a girl. Yeah, he was my biggest advocate.
We certainly have a lot of parents watching and listening to this podcast. You talked about how your coach and your teammates and your siblings protected you, formed that buffer. How about your parents specifically? They put you in, they obviously continued to support your journey. How, when you look back, did they support you at that time? Because I'm sure there were a lot of challenging days.
Yeah, I think I was like, nothing was gonna stop me, and I think they knew that, and, I mean, there were 6 kids, right? Like, they had a lot of kids to just, like, rally together, and I guess they just maybe just saw the love that it was the same, and they just supported it. Again, all that stuff around me, they did protect me from, I think I'd mentioned that, so that probably helped a lot, but it actually made me a lot stronger because it just pushed me, but I love the games too much to let anything bother me, and I think that's where they my family made me have that perspective just by being them, and by being really good leaders and really good support. Like we were a really like very, and we still are like this very tight knit family that like supports each other. So everybody was behind everything we did for each other. So I think it wasn't hard in that sense. So I think it was just yeah more so just the natural supporting me.
I think it's really interesting that you talk about how your siblings always accepted you into their games. And I've read stories about how you guys would be playing your mini sticks games and sometimes they'd get pretty rough, but you were always included. I'm sure there are some people watching, listening that can identify with that. And then there are probably other families who say, well, it's funny because our boys, they never let our daughter play with them. They say it's too rough or it's not for them. Who set the tone in that sibling group to say, no, Cammie's always included?
Well, Tony's the leader of the family. My brother, oldest brother, Tony. He was the rally of the troops, and I mean, literally, like just marching behind him is kind of what it felt like. He set the tone. He set the rules. We were highly competitive. Like we in our basement, we played mini stick hockey, and we had these walls that were sort of, I don't know if you remember those walls in like the '70s, but like they were like almost soft when you'd hit them, so they'd rattle and we would go hard at each other. And the biggest thing that we said, and I love that my parents weren't involved. Like they were not involved. They trusted. The biggest thing was like, if you tell mom, you're done. Your game is over. You're never playing again. So that was the rule. And there were so many times where I got like halfway up the stairs because someone would like slash me or hit me too hard or just whatever, or get into my kitchen, like in my head. And I would just run up the stairs and they were like, do you know what's going to happen? And I would just stop and I would just like take a breath and go down. And what I think it did without parents getting involved, it just helped us regulate. Like we regulated so well because someone wasn't in there trying to break up a fight and say he did it and she did it. We ended up having to like work it out ourselves. be creative with how we played in the basement and what we did with like all like how we made it our basement. We taped the floors with tape and we flipped up like we had like that old goalpost. It was like a toy goalpost. We put it upside down for our net. It was just so authentic. And yeah, I think it was great that they stayed upstairs and they just let us do our thing.
How do you think that experience with your siblings, but even more so, the way your parents listened to you and supported you when you told them what you truly wanted to follow and were able to overcome some of the barriers that stood in the way, how has that informed the way that you now parent your own family?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, they're great role models for that. You know, we want our kids to do what they have passion about, and I don't know if there's pressure on them because Ray and I have been successful and their brothers have been successful, the older brothers, but we stick with that way.
Well, you mention it, the pressure, and there's an irony here because when you were growing up, the pressure was to not put you in hockey. And now, as you mentioned, your husband, Ray Ferraro, very accomplished NHL career. Many sports fans and certainly hockey fans will know him. We've talked about many of the accomplishments that you've had in hockey. And then you mentioned their older brothers as well. Riley and Reese's older brothers, Matt and Landon. Landon played in the NHL. Matt played junior A in hockey as well. You would think your offspring might have some pressure to play the sport in which their parents both excel.
Yes.
I don't know if they ever felt it. Did you ever feel pressure to have your boys play hockey because of that?
No, I think it's the same as like how we grew up is like whatever you are into, we expose them to every sport. And they did like Riley played hockey, our older one played hockey for until he was 12. But then unfortunately, and I think that was the hardest part is like the culture of our new sport is to make you choose a sport. He chose soccer over hockey, and we were really happy for him because we wanted him to choose what he wanted to choose. And frankly, a lot of people already had big expectations for him. Like, the day he was born, someone sent me like his draft year, and I was like, okay, we're not even out of the hospital. You know what I mean? So a little bit of a relief there to like get him to do his thing that he wants to do, and us learning a new sport was really fun. Yeah, but I think a lot of people did ask, you know, right, "Do you play hockey?" You know, and but he chose another sport, and we were happy with that.
You brought it up, so I'm going to ask you about this. The current environment we find in youth sports with pressure to specialize so early. And the way you described it, it's too bad that he had to choose so early. But that's kind of where we found ourselves. How different is it from when you grew up in that respect?
Yeah, I know if I could go back, I probably would have been a little more mellow about it because it seemed so serious at like 11 or 12, like so you just thought like, well, they're not going the coach is saying they're not going to play them or it would have been nice to just let them play for a little longer and get Reese. Reese really wanted to play as well. And so we always just, you know, they were in baseball and they were in other sports when hockey or when soccer wasn't on. But when the 2 collided, it was like some of the coaches they were hearing were, like, getting upset if guys would miss and they wouldn't play, and then their time would go down, and it was just that's the hardest part, like, I do wish that we were more accepting of multi-sport athletes because really it does help the athlete in a lot of ways, and even burnout, like, just doing something different. So I think that's a bit broken at this point, like, I would love to see some come back a little bit where you could actually participate in high level sports. I mean, there are multi-sport college players, and that's just gone. And I get it. I get the players that want to like specialize, but think there should be an opportunity for kids when they're younger to keep playing other sports in the youth spectrum because it's not only going to benefit them to figure out what they love, but also benefit them for like, well, there's two things. If they're interested in taking it to a higher level, you still can play other sports and you might even be more well-rounded. But also if you're very small margin of kids, any in a percentage will make that level, then you've wasted all that like you know, you got to be this is your identity. I think that's it's a bit broken because kids feel like you're socked into one lane and if you don't make it, you're a failure and your parents are trying to set you up and we're all doing our best to try to support them, but like you're stuck in this one area that maybe wasn't you're going to be your passion in the first place. You just thought it was when you were 9, you know? So that's kind of broken, I think. I don't know how you fix it, but it would be nice if it was supported at a younger age.
I wholeheartedly agree. And my hope is that podcasts like this and hearing from credible people like yourself and many of the other athletes I've already spoken to, that will carry some weight and it will convince more parents to get on board with that movement, because I really do believe parents are a part of that solution. When you look at your own upbringing in sport, what other sports did you play? Obviously your passion was hockey.
Uh, well, we did everything. Anything that we could sign up for, we did anything. We played baseball, we played soccer, we played, like, tennis, anything that came out that was, like, across the street at the rec center that we had lived by was like, "Sign us up." It was awesome. So we would hang up the skates in the s after the season, and then it would be baseball season or soccer season. Obviously, it's really different because the specialized athletes that do make pros, like, I think it does, um what we're seeing right now is the skill level, it's so high. It's so high, and they're specialized very early, but I just think for a majority of people, it's better to just be more well-rounded.
I agree with you. And I'm a believer that many of those skills from other sports are transferable. I know you just mentioned soccer. Am I correct in saying that you were offered a scholarship at the University of Wisconsin? Like, you were talented in other sports as well, correct?
Yeah, well, there was no hockey and no internet. I didn't even know hockey existed for women, so I kept thinking, "How am I gonna do this?" Can I go to Wisconsin and play, always thinking of maybe I can do it with the guys, you know? But I had an option to go to Wisconsin and play soccer, but, I ended up finding out that I got into Providence College out east, which was the only place that women had hockey at the time. So, I didn't know there was women's hockey until I was 16 or 17. We had no idea that there was women's hockey out east because, again, there's no internet. Someone had told my mom, one of the dads that I played against his son, like, year after year, gave my mom a pamphlet, said, "Hey, do you know women play hockey out east?" And so my mom was like, "No idea," and then that's kinda how it was started, but I was pretty lucky to get out there because the first year I went out, we had a women's world championship right after that, so I kinda went right into that. I'm lucky I didn't miss it, a lot of players before me missed that.
Yeah, timing is everything in life, certainly, and you are an example of that. And you've mentioned that before as well. I believe it was Cindy Curley you referenced, who ended up becoming your hockey idol when you
Yeah.
found she was the star in Providence. And maybe if she'd been a few years later, that she'd be standing in your skates, so to
She
speak.
would've. She would have been the first woman in the Hall of Fame by far. Like, she was just so dominant, and she missed it because she was older and she had a couple bad knees, and she didn't make the Olympic team, just more of aging out, right? It was just came just a little bit too late for her, but she deservingly, was the best women's hockey player, and so dominant.
Just before we leave the sports specialization versus multi-sport discussion, because you played so many sports growing up and you didn't know if there was going to be a path in hockey going forward, which you obviously ended up forging. How do you think those sports, playing them, better prepared you to be what you would ultimately become, Cammy, which is one of the greatest female hockey players we've ever seen?
Well, thank you. I think anything that you do sport-wise will help you, and it crosses over. Like, just the coordination and trying new things in different parts of the brain, doing different parts of the thing, like, doing different, like, thinking and learning new skills and just being, like, an all-around athlete is really helpful because you see, sometimes these programmed kids who are not necessarily these athletes, they're just super programmed, and it hurts them a little bit where they're not necessarily working on the athletic side, it's just, like, programmed and specialized so early, but, yeah, I think those sports help me. I mean, you look at, like, a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who was a pitcher for how long, had no sights of football, but that clearly helped him in his game with football. So, there's athletes like that you hear stories of. He's probably one of the, you know, has the biggest platform for that, but he's an example of that.
He certainly is. And when you watch the off angle throws that he does with his arm, like those are baseball
Yeah.
throws decided to bring into football. And it brings up another great point, at least from my perspective. when you say programmed, I think of how little free play there is now. And if we're specializing with children so early and they're always in organized sport as opposed to mini sticks in the basement or playing another sport or out on the schoolyard or neighborhood pickup games, my personal view is that we lose an aspect of creativity in those athletes. Do
Yeah.
you find the same thing with the up and coming players you're seeing or some that you've coached along the way?
Well, it is pretty wild to see the talent, individual skill talent as a product of that. I mean, it's so much different. There's everyone their edges are so good. Their skating is so good, and then just stick work and their shot. It does make it better. It does the sport better. I think the NHL is everything. It's fine. I think it's more about specific cases with players where maybe they're just too programmed to figure that out. They don't have enough hockey sense, the way that the full game is played. So they might have been an athlete that have trained and specialized for so long, but they because of that they didn't learn the hockey sense. But I'm not saying I don't want to make a big claim that just because you're in these programs that you can't be and you can't reach it because we've seen numbers of these kids make the NHL and be stars. It's just some kids miss some of that part of like the free space and it's just too programmed. So I think I would suggest like a blend of that, making sure if you're doing, you have to be doing if you're trying to be a high level athlete right now, you have to be doing those specialized, but you also need to have that free play and that creativity to learn the game on your own, when there's, you know, multiple players on the ice and you're trying to figure it out instead of just on the ice by yourself doing one drill, right?
Well, and when you mentioned it a little bit earlier and talked about going down that pathway so early, Ray last week, when I spoke with him, he talked about it being a very narrow pathway. And we get kids on this narrow pathway, at least with the pressure around it and the way that it's portrayed so early that they may not realize, and their families and parents may not realize that if they fall off that pathway at some point, they either don't love the sport as much anymore, or they aren't at a level where they're going to advance with the sport. They may not realize that there are other avenues available to them. And that to me is my biggest fear, Cami, because as you mentioned earlier, there's this very, very small percentage of players in any sport that are going to make it to the most advanced levels. And it shouldn't be a disappointment for those who don't. There still should be a pathway for them to be involved in sport for life.
Yeah, I agree. And you want to do it for the love of it. And I think that there gets to be this like, it's almost like squeezing, like you're squeezing it so hard because you want it for your kid. And then they feel that. And then they feel that if they don't succeed, they're failing. And I don't even know if some of these kids know what even the success means. Like, it is a very narrow path. Out of all the hockey players, the percentages or all the athletes, the percentage is very low when you to turn professional. So all those kids that didn't make it and had been groomed to make it, and have been, working since they were 5 or 6 to do the same thing all the time, it's really hard on these kids. And I think parents have to, be aware of, like, our narrative and our way of trying to be too tight or be, overthinking it or saying, "Oh, they're not do this," or I just think we get caught up in it. And, we've had a lot of hindsight now. We've had Landon and Matt go through it, and now it's our younger 2 are going through it. You learn as you go. So I think to parents, I think it would be just the best thing is just to be really mindful of your message and your want for your child when you're starting out to play and you're very excited they're playing, and how are you projecting yourself to your child, I think is something to think about.
When I had that conversation with Ray, he talked about a number of things with reference to you. He said that you are a great teacher with regard to sport. He said that you have great instincts. And the statement that really stuck with me, if people have watched or listened to this last week as well, that may have stuck with them is Cami views sport in a very holistic way. I'm interested to hear you expand on that statement and just explain how you view sport overall for any person.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. The holistic, I guess, would be just the love of it. I've never heard Ray, mention that or say that way, and I never thought of it. Um, I just think you know, it has to come from the person who's playing it, and I think we're losing the joy in the process, and we're losing the joy in the athlete or in the child. And I think if you can sort of just take some steps back and go, okay, the climate here is so intense. There's 6 year olds like being rated as the top one of the top teams. Like it's so crazy how the climate has gone, right? But I think if you can just from a, I guess, holistic point, like and just naturally support your child to play sport and get the fun from it, but also, you learn so much for sport. And that's a lesson to all these athletes who have played a number of years and have loved their sport, but maybe didn't make it is there is so much that sport teaches you for the next step of your life. And I think that's really important because you're not a failure. That it's not what defines you, but the lessons that you learn being on a team, your work ethic that you had to do, the extra sessions you did because you wanted to get better. Those aren't for naught if you didn't make it because you can take all of those experiences to your next phase in life. And I think that's where, unfortunately, some kids feel like they've just they spent all their life doing this thing and now they hate that sport because they didn't make it and they feel like they've let the family down, and it's a real issue. So I think if you can, as parents, like be very mindful of how you are acting towards your kids and what messages you're sending. And we're not perfect. All of us get caught up in it. We all do. We love watching our kids play. We love watching them succeed. But I think it's that having that wherewithal to, like, stop and think and say or have a conversation with your kid, like, "Hey, after a game, how do you want it to go? Do you wanna talk about the game?" When your kid comes in and says, "How did I play?" Is that a sign that maybe they're wanting to make you feel like, they're only happy if you felt like they played well? Like, those are the things to think about, and I think it helps with your bond with your child and also just supporting them and realizing that, you're supporting them no matter what.
Well, and defining what that success is, that success doesn't need to be professional hockey. Success doesn't need to be a scholarship to a Division One school or to a youth sports school in Canada. And as you mentioned, you have the benefit of hindsight now. And Riley has excelled in soccer. He's pursuing his dream. He's at Penn State right now. Reese is in the middle of forging his own journey with sport with the benefit of hindsight. But even if you can transport yourself back to when they were first getting involved with any sport at a young age, when you put your children in, Cammy, what did you ultimately want them to get from sport?
Well, first of all, they have interest in it. So if they wanna play it, that's great, because sometimes, if you have a kid that doesn't wanna play and you're forcing them, I think you gotta find there's plenty of things that kids can get involved in. For us, it was just their excitement to play. They were exposed to it with all their cousins and their older brothers and hearing about our careers with, seeing pictures or whatever. They were very familiar with like sport from a very young age. And I think the memories that I love was them in the basement. We would just let them go in the basement and they'd be down there all morning, all afternoon when they were little. And those were the things that I remember as a kid. So we cultivated that as well. And that's where you learn and that's where you play and that's where you figure out what you want to do. So we just exposed them to as much as we could. They played all kinds of sports and even with high school basketball and those kind of things. I don't know. I think it's hard if kids can't do that. Like they have to be in one thing. I think I'm just a big supporter of multi-sport as much as you can.
I agree with that sentiment as well. We talked earlier about how you've broken barriers and you have been the, if you can see it, you can be it person for so many youngsters growing up. You've inspired so many, and I know you get those messages and you have people come up to you daily, weekly, monthly, all the time mentioning that to you. When you look at youth sport now, what inspires you, Cami?
Um, it's a good question. Are you meaning just in general, like where we're headed?
Or even when you just watch kids play to this day, you do clinics, you talk to
Yeah.
young people, you have the opportunity, and probably many you have to turn down just because of time, but you
Yeah.
have the opportunity to be around these
Yeah.
kids. What is it that you see that inspires you in youth sports?
I think it's the love. I think it's the fun. I think it's like the passion. I coached some couple teams when our boys were little, and then just being around the soccer fields and the hockey rinks and the basketball. It just yeah, it's the kids that have that like glimmer in their eye when they're playing, and and I love seeing the competitiveness that comes out in them, and how that manifests itself. And I think sport gives so much to so many people, and again, it's like it teaches you a lot of valuable lessons, about yourself, and about team, and about, fairness, and sometimes not fair, and there's just a lot to learn through sport, and you're being active as well, and it being a part of a team when you're a kid, there's not many other avenues that you can be a team in, when you're working for something to try to win. So sport gives you that, and I think that's what I love about it, and that's what I love seeing kids that really just embrace that and have that big smile, or they're so determined that that brings me joy.
Well, you mentioned coaching, and I do want to talk about it here because it's a big issue for a lot of parents. They coach or they have their kids being coached by somebody and they're on the periphery. And it does seem like this parent coaching gap is growing, that it's the coach over here and it's the parents over here. I'm wondering from a coaching perspective first, what can coaches do? Because you've been in those shoes or skates, so to speak. What can coaches do to get parents aligned in terms of behavior and positive support for the kids and their teams?
I think it's important to set some ground rules right from the start. These coaches, most probably all of them are volunteer coaches, right? There's very and maybe at a higher levels they hire coaches, but these volunteer parents, you've got to you have to like understand where they're coming from. Some of them might just be learning the sport, some of them might have never coached, and I think that's important for the coaches to set a ground rules for the season of do's and don'ts, and how you work together, as a parent group, and if there's a problem, how it's dealt with, those kind of things, like just setting out boundaries, because it's gotten really, from what I'm seeing, like it's gotten like really overwhelming for coaches who are actually just like volunteering and not making really money, and spending lots of time on the ice with these kids, but also getting so much backlash from parents and so many opinions. I think it's smarter to just, here's the ground rules, that I'm setting, and here's, you know, whatever the parameters are, it might help. It's not going to alleviate everything, but it might alleviate problems of having to talk to parents, every time you get off the ice, or all this drama around it. So I think it'd be better to have that. Maybe it's easier said than done, but if you can stick to something with, this is the way it's going to be, and if I'll happily have you, talk to you when you need to, but here's when, and here's how.
Setting those expectations, I think you're right, is a really big part of it, just from an understanding point of view and to create a reference point so that as a parent, you've been told at the beginning of the year, here's what we're trying to do with your kids. And that's what we're always going to lead with. We might not always get it right, but this is what we're trying to do with your children. And then if you have that open dialogue, all of a sudden you can go back to that when something that really, if we think about it, Cami, as trivial as ice time or playing time comes up. 1 minute here, 4 minutes there, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a big deal. But people get so competitive and so wrapped up in it that all of a sudden, this minor thing becomes the focal point instead of the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember just the first time Riley played hockey, I was coaching on the ice, and one of the parents right away, first day, was like, "Why is there a woman coaching my son?" Like, right away. Like, and so you had to earn their trust. And but the climate is, there's just so many opinions. I think it's just you have to remember what you're doing it for and who's doing it's for the child's benefit. It's not for the parents' benefit. And it's hard on coaches. But I think, I guess, like I said, if the ground rules are set a little bit better and, there's expectations, and there's no reason that kids at that age shouldn't be having equal ice time. Like, maybe at the end of the game, you run a tournament and you want best guys out there, great. But like, kids need to play if they're on the team, right? So there's a balance and nothing's perfect, but, you know, hopefully these conversations and coaches with conversations with parents, they get on the same page, because that's tough for these parents that are volunteering and getting, you know, way more than they bargained for when they're coaching.
Well, and speaking with somebody very recently, I'll be transparent with the sport of hockey. I was told very recently by someone high level in Canada, look, coaches, referees, volunteers, these numbers are declining right now. And the fingers being pointed at parents. They're saying they don't want to deal with the pressure that is coming with it. So I asked you about from the coaching side what you can do. You're a parent as well, and you haven't always been the coach. So for those listening and watching, what can parents do? How can they better support those who are giving up their time and energy to coach, officiate, volunteer at the youth sports level?
I think it's just having a conversation with yourself, or just like reflecting on how you're presenting yourself. We're emotional about our kids because we love our kids, and we want them to do great, but we have to sometimes separate that when it comes to sport, when they're doing their thing. And there's sometimes a lot of blame on a coach, or he's not doing this right. I don't agree with that. I think it's never going to be perfect, but I think as a parent, even the refs, like, you got a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old referee on the ice, and you're screaming over the boards at them. And it's like, and we've seen it at soccer a number of times where, like, these kids are out here on a Saturday morning, they're refereeing the game, and the parents are just ruthless. And it's like, check yourself here. Like, listen to yourself. Like, I think it's self-awareness, to be honest. We all get caught up in the emotion. It's part of it. But if it's consistent, I think you really have to think hard about, like, how you're presenting yourself to your kid, to your team, to the refs, just to the sport. It's hard. I don't know. I don't know how you fix it, but I think there's been, you sometimes you go to the rink and you see those, or a baseball field, and they're like, "Okay, you're not the umpire, and please," there are reminders. But I think for parents, I would, again, you could be the most sane, normal, like, not crazy, but you might find yourself getting that way because there's emotion to it all. So I think it's just having that, like, wherewithal, or having that, like, "Hey, how do I present myself? What can I change? Or what am I doing something that not like me?" But when I get home, I'm like, "Oh," just reflecting. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but those are some that come to mind.
Well, that to me is a big part of it. And that is one of my ultimate goals with this podcast is that there will be some self-reflection. I know as a parent, I try to embrace self-reflection. As you mentioned earlier, you, me, everyone, we all make mistakes. We could get caught up. But are we taking the time after to say, is that how I want to be?
Yeah,
To what end? To what end am I yelling at a referee? And I'm not suggesting that that's a behavior I've had or you've had, but we've all seen it.
yeah.
We've seen that environment get tense and ramped up. And for what? So that
And
somebody's
well,
child's gonna win a game?
yeah, and I think that's where when you're caught up the emotion, and even as a player that happens, but so it does happen with the parents. And so Ray and I had this conversation, is like, if one of us was like getting a little bit too elevated, we would be like, "Hey, gut check." We just, I don't know why we use it. We just like, and we would just check each other. And it was really helpful, because there were times where you're just like, like, you're like, "Is my kid awake?" Or like, and you're like, "Just like, check yourself here." Like, we kind of promised each other that we would keep each other in check because we didn't want to be that. But there were times we were, so we did. We did. We checked each other. I think that's important, maybe with your partner, to have that conversation, is, "Hey, if I'm getting a little heated, or if I'm, you know, getting a little overboard here, like, maybe you just give a little nudge and, hey, let's check here."
It's a really good system to implement, and while not every parent can be at the game with their partner, and we know it could be a single parent situation as well, maybe that's part of the solution is within that parent group, having almost like a buddy system. Listen, we're going to watch the game together. We're going to be here each week. Can you be my check and balance? And I'll do the same for you. Because at the end of the day, I don't think people really want to behave in that manner, as you mentioned. And I do think that organizations can help this dialogue as well with the way they educate coaches. You mentioned most of the coaches who are coming out, they're volunteers. They might not have all the technical aspects, or maybe they do. Maybe they have a steep background in the sport, but they also might not know how to deal with parents and how to have these conversations, Cami.
Yeah.
How can organizations better prepare these volunteers, not just in coaching the children, but for creating a positive relationship with the parents that they're going to be interacting with throughout a season?
Well, I can only imagine at this point that there are those conversations because there is so much parent involvement, parent opinion, and you have when you have volunteer coaches, I can imagine there are things in place at certain arenas or fields where you can go to someone higher up to talk to about, or I don't know. I imagine that's there. Where there's got to be some boundaries set. So I don't know the total solution.
I do think that it's a part of sport I would like to see improve at the youth level, though, Cami. I'd like to see more education given to what Allison Forsyth in the debut episode turned socio-emotional coaching, as opposed to, we're going to give you the drills. This is what we want you to do. Here's the system we want you to implement. How about how we deal with children just as people? How about how we deal with parents just as people? I would like to see more focus on that as we try to get the bigger lessons out of sport that we're all striving for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are there are like small companies that actually come in and can give those talks, or maybe it's the organizations that implement that and make that a mandatory thing, because it is a really good point and it would be very helpful to take care of that side of the player.
Something that we've sort of talked around, but I want to focus on a minute here now is inclusion. We mentioned if you can see it, you can be it. It strikes me that you are the living, breathing representation of inclusion for so many people. And you had to break down those barriers. But now that they see you at the Olympics, in the Hockey Hall of Fame, the first female pro scout in the National Hockey League, an assistant general manager, you also authored a children's book entitled I Can Play Too. But it does worry me that with increasing costs, with increasing time commitments, and increasing pressure in youth sport, that we might not be going that direction. The environment you see today, do you see it becoming more inclusive or less inclusive right now, Cami?
Well, I think from a financial standpoint, it does exclude a number of people for sure. I know there's some great programs and companies that will pair with organizations to help kids, and I think those programs. I hope there's just more and more support for that, because I don't know really the solution when it's so expensive, and then you've got extra ice time, and then you have to buy new equipment that's so much more money than ever used to be. Ice time costs are so much higher, and then again, specialization. If you're getting extra something off ice or extra ice, it is very expensive. So I think I always thought always is like there were some, rinks where people just throw their extra equipment into a closet, and then people could go look and find, like, if their kid needed a new pair of shin guards, there might be one in there. I always thought there should be more organized, swaps for, like, when your kid goes to the next he or she goes to the next level, you have equipment, that you're not using now because 'cause you're done with it, and what do you do with it? Like, you could go send it yes, you could go take it to a store that resells it, but in the organization, you could literally just hand that to the next team. So I think from equipment standpoint, that to me would be like a big suggestion, is like, get back to those times where you can just hand down the equipment when you're done with it, and let maybe you don't have to buy as much equipment, because the kids grow so fast. They're out of skates like that. They're out of, like, helmets, and so if that was a more organizations did that, maybe there'd be more, just a lessen the cost in some way, at least.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it's why I'm such a big proponent of Jumpstart. It's the charity of choice of this podcast for that, because they are providing access for people and families that would otherwise not have access to certain sports. And hockey, I would say, is chief among them. It's always struck me as someone who wasn't able to play hockey because of the cost and time commitments with a single mother growing up. But I was able to play football. And the whole reason was because all you did is rent the equipment for the year. If I'd had to buy shoulder pads and I'd had to buy a helmet and all the padding every year, there's no way my family would have been involved. I don't want to make this that we're at a crisis point, but I do wonder, as someone who's involved with hockey and it's at the tip of the pyramid in terms of expensive sports in Canada to begin with, are you concerned that the sport becomes too inaccessible?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I Jumpstart, I've seen a lot of families really benefit from Jumpstart and all other sports too, not just hockey, and it's a great program. I think there needs to be more of that. I did team up at one point, with a company to give out some scholarships for girls, and the we had to choose, I think we had can't remember the number we gave out, but we had to choose from, like, hundreds of applicants who talked about how hard it was for their kids to play because of the money, and I was shocked. I was shocked. I mean, just n numbers, like, the stories that piled in, and it was like so many girls wanted to play and boys obviously too wanna play, and they're restricted because of this the the way it's gone, especially too where there's, like, having to go to these tournaments. It's a really big deal, like, even the soccer, we had to do a lot of fundraising to get these kids to go to these places. They travel all over, so it's just so expensive, but programs like that are really helpful, and I think like I said, I think if the actual organizations would think about the equipment stuff, that could be a little bit of a help, and, every bit helps because you don't wanna keep people away from something that they really wanna try and love, and I know there's a lot of stories out there that kids just can't afford to play hockey. It's just, priced out.
Well, and I do think that pressure ultimately ends up on the kids. They get a sense of the cost and what the family's investing and the weight of the opportunity, if we want to call it that. And I have no idea, Cammy, I've never asked you or Ray about this, but with Riley specifically, who's the oldest that the two of you raised together, whether they felt a pressure to try to perform at a certain tournament, or in Riley's case, trying to get a collegiate scholarship. If that's the case, how did you as a parent try to help him and maybe Reese as well deal with the pressure right now in youth sports?
I think there's a time for pressure. Like, it's okay. Like, I think it's more about not trying to fix everything because you have to go through like, Riley faced adversity, for a full year where I was like, "This is actually really good for you because you're gonna come out of it better." And same with Reese. If Reese had real trouble when he was younger with a coach, like, really hard time where he was so hard on him that he almost, like, wanted to leave the team. It was more about, like, saying, "'Kay," it's like, just talking to him about, like, sometimes you get coaches that are like this, and how are we gonna deal with it? Like, how can you it's taking my confidence away. Well, how can you like, what can we do to help you realize that, like, that maybe you can try to work through that. So instead of trying to, like, switch a team, we were like, "Well, you're on this team," and he didn't ask to switch a team, but I'm just saying as a parent, we didn't rush and go, "Let's switch his team." It was like, "Okay, this is what it is, and sometimes you're gonna get coaches that are like this, and other times you're not, and so you have to work through that because that's life." When we try to fix everything and it all comes from the place of love when you're trying to fix something for your kids, sometimes you have to let them go through it, and I think that's really important because those lessons teach you, and sometimes out of that comes motivation from the kids too, like, something clicks in them where they're just like, "Okay, this is normal, sometimes this happens, nothing's perfect all the time," so they'll find a way to rise or they'll find a way to, like, just cope with that. Maybe their confidence goes down, but then maybe they learn that they can be confident, or maybe they learn the next. It's just, there's so many valuable things that can come from both, like adversity and like success. So I think you have to embrace all of it as a parent. And again, we've got hindsight. We've had you know, maybe wasn't as easy to see early, but I think that's important for parents to know.
Bringing up hard coaching is a really good topic for this podcast because parents see it. Some are believers in it, some are not. And I do think that there's a line because to get the best out of a player, there are going to be times where that player needs to be pushed and needs to deal with the pressure that you just talked about. But there's also a line and there's a manner about which a coach can go doing it, and they can go too far. And you probably saw it. I certainly saw it as a young athlete that never got to the kind of level you got to, but we all saw that kind of coaching, and I don't think we believe that type of coaching has a place. So, as a parent, Cammy, how do you find that line, and what crosses that line for you as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your child's like wanting to quit or your child's, and this isn't from like you trying to suggest that it's like if they're just not enjoying the sport, it's a conversation. I think that would be helpful. On maybe there's not even an awareness that that's happening. Unfortunately, in youth sports, you've got a lot of volunteers, so you don't. It's hard to. It's harder. They've got a lot to think about, and maybe they maybe it's easier to have a discussion. I don't know because maybe they're not aware. But I think in the case that I talked about with Reese, like I thought about at one point having a discussion, but we were getting to the end of the season and we just let it go and we just let Reese play through it. But there are times when sure you can have that discussion of maybe the coaches aren't aware that the child's feeling this way, right? So I do think that there's a place for that. I don't have a you know, I guess like a perfect solution. It's just I just don't think we need to run to the coach for everything. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of that as well. So I think it's when it's really but when there's an issue with your child and you see that they're just not enjoying it, and maybe there's something that the coach has no idea that he or she's doing, that's probably a time for a chat.
Yeah, it's a really good point because we did have this question come in from a listener saying, what do you do if you disagree with the coaching philosophy or manner in which your child is being coached? And it sounds to me like you're saying, okay, we'll start with a conversation with your child, and then if it continues, there may need to be that further conversation with the coach. And I guess if it gets past that and the behavior doesn't change, if you think it's destructive, then probably with the organization as well.
Yeah, I think there's it's the context of what it is. I mean, if it's something over the line, obviously you don't, you want to address that, you know. You've got to protect your kid too. But if it's something that's mild and I think I guess talking about like sometimes you're going to get a teacher in school that you don't like that much, but you're going to go to school. Right? So you might not jive with the coach that much, but I think if there was a real issue with the kid or if the conversation was just very like not loaded and you had communication, maybe you let the coach know that he or she is not happy. Is there anything we can do? Or I think that part is important. I think it's when parents go to the coaches to try to change their forecheck or say they're not winning or this my son and daughter should be here. Like, I think it's there's a fine line there, but when it comes to the child like having issues and maybe doesn't want to play for a reason, I think the coach should be aware.
Well, and I think the school analogy is a good one, Cami, because I know as a coach myself, and I've coached a couple of different levels, and I look back at some of the coaching practices I had early or things perhaps I focused on, I guess is more where I'm going early, is that as coaches, we can tend to focus on mistakes and how we want to correct those mistakes and how we want to fix them. We can't lose sight of the fact that maybe the kids are getting most of it right. Like, I
Yeah.
don't, we'd be okay with a sixth grade teacher telling our child who got 87 questions out of 100 right that the only thing that matters is the 13 that they got
Right.
wrong.
No,
And as
very
coaches,
good.
I think we have to make sure we reinforce you're doing a lot of things right.
Yeah.
Here's how we can fix the rest.
And I think that's a great point about how you're saying focusing on the negative because that is a lot of times you can get in that rut. And I think when we coach, I remember with hockey, I remember one of the kids, his dad was pretty hard on him, a little intense or whatever. So he was very afraid to make mistakes. And I remember he came in, I think he gave up the puck or he just gave up a breakaway. They scored and we lost the game because of it. He was just devastated, right? And I think for that with him, I remember sitting with him and just saying like, he was just he blamed himself for everything, and I thought, "This is not your fault. You did what you needed to do." And so I think those are the coaches that can if you can pick up on that and understand, like, when you can go to those kids, I think that is so critical, for kids 'cause making mistakes is like we're all seeing perfection. They're all seeing perfection on Instagram and whatever social platform they're on. Everything's perfect, right? Everyone's doing, has done this and the success here, and you see all this perfection, and that's not reality. And mistakes is part of it. Mistakes is part of learning. And so when you have these kids that are squeezing so tight because they're afraid that they're going to get yelled at maybe by the coach or the parent, that's really tough, especially at the young level. This kid was like 8 at the time. Like, you know, it shouldn't be about that. It shouldn't be it should be there has to be an approach there where kids all feel, empowered to play and excited to play. You're gonna get different coaches that you jive with, but I do think that's a super important message is like mistakes should be totally welcomed. Like that's how you learn, right? I remember one of the parents yelling like there were 3 guys behind the net. And, like, there were 3 guys behind the net in the game, and the puck went in the net in the slot, and, I was like, "Well, we've had 3 like, I think 3 practices, and then we had a game, and we hadn't worked you didn't work on anything yet." You know what I mean? It's like they don't know it yet, so you should just, like, let the process happen, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of opinions from the outside or from maybe coaches wanting to win, but I think you just have to put things in perspective, and it's not about you, it's about the kids, you know?
I remember that striking me in the lead up to the Rasmus Dahlin draft. I remember a big profile on him and how everybody knew he was going to be the number one pick. And they talked about how he took chances in his game. And they asked Rasmus about that with his coach. How does he deal with that? And he said, he actually supports me for being creative out there,
That's awesome.
me to try things because I will never achieve things if I play everything safe.
Yeah, and you know what? Our kids have had coaches like that, and it's freeing. It is so freeing for them, and honestly, when you look at it, it's probably the way to get the best out of them, because when they feel that empowerment of, like, "I can make a mistake," and it just frees you up of so much, and then the creativity starts, and then the fun is there, and from a aspect of actually trying to get better, but also an aspect of just like we talked about, having fun, it's the best way to go.
It certainly is. I know you have to go. I'm going to let you get on with your day here. But before I do, I did want to finish with your family because I wonder if that's where it comes from. We started with your family, we'll finish there as well. I've said this to many people. You may not know this, but I've said to many people that one of the most admirable things about you, in my opinion, Cammy, is that you have accomplished so much more in sport than most of the planet, and yet you would never know it by the way you carry yourself. You're one of the most humble people I know and most caring people
Thank you.
I know. Where does that come from in your family?
It's my family. It's my parents. They started it. My brothers followed it, and I followed it. It was nobody would let like, I remember Tony, who's the oldest of the 6 of us, he would, like, always talk to me about, like, how to be a leader and keep your feet on the ground, never ever get cocky. You treat your teammates with respect. You can lead by example. You want to be the hardest worker. Like all these messages. But my mom and dad were those type of people. Like they were just very kind, very humble. We worked as a unit. There was no one stronger than the other. It was like we were just. It was such a wonderful like, time to grow up with that group. Like, my we're still to this day, so tight and so supportive, and I look at my sister who never got to play sports, but she's our biggest cheerleader. Like, she's sending videos of, like, everyone that's, doing things that she reads and the kids, and she's just unbelievable. So we have, like, this team. Our family was like, for having so many kids, like, it was a team, and we had to work as a team, and we learned so many valuable lessons about, being on a team, and then also we weren't thinking about leadership, but it was more about how you respect the team around you, and that's part of leadership, and so I think that's where it comes from, and I don't know any other way. I think I'm really grateful for all that I got from my family.
Well, I'm very grateful that you took the time to have this conversation and to be part of this extremely unique discussion about your unique hockey family with you and Ray. And Landon's going to be doing this with me as well to get these different perspectives. I know people have gained so much from your perspective and your insight. Cammy, thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. Thanks, Scotty. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Sports Parents and that you found some tangible takeaways that can help you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way you can support this podcast is by subscribing, following, reviewing, and sending us great comments on whichever platform you're watching or listening. If you'd like to send an email, the email address is feedback@bettersportsparents.com. And we'd like to grow this as quickly as possible, so we would kindly ask that you share it with your respective networks and with the other parents that you see at your children's sporting events. Better Sports Parents is a production of Toolkit Content, and the music on this podcast is provided by Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun. That's what it's supposed to be about.